The region known as Sabi Sands, connected to the greater Kruger ecosystem, has long been shaped by the slow, relentless movements of lions whose histories rise and fall with the landscape itself. Territories shift, prides expand or collapse, and coalitions emerge from obscurity only to leave their mark on the generations that follow. Among these shifting forces, one coalition would come to define an entire era of observation: the Birmingham Boys. Their story begins far from the attention that later surrounded them. Forged by the same pressures that mold every male lion: competition, displacement, and the constant need to secure a place in a world ruled entirely by strength. Their ascent, dominance, and eventual decline unfolded in real time before researchers, guides, and cameras. What remains today is a historical account of how two brothers reshaped territories, influenced prides, and ultimately faced the same inevitable cycle that governs every lion empire. The origins of the Birmingham Boys trace back to the northern reaches of the greater Kruger system, in an area known as Birmingham, within Timbavati. This region had already witnessed the rise and fall of several coalitions over the years, each leaving behind a trail of genetic influence and fragmented territories. Into this landscape, a litter of males was born around 2010-2011. They entered a world defined by uncertainty, where survival depended not only on instinct, but on navigating the complex social structure of their natal pride. These cubs grew under the protection of adult males whose tenure, like all lion reigns, had an expiration date. Their early months were shaped by the routine challenges that determine which cubs survive: competition with siblings, scarcity of resources, and the constant threat posed by rival males seeking to take over the pride. For male lions, the future is rarely secure, because their early safety relies on the strength and stability of the coalition guarding them. As they approached adolescence, the young males, initially a group larger than the famous pair they would later become, began forming their identity through small displays of dominance, mock fights, and a growing awareness of the world beyond their pride's boundaries. They were part of a natural process that prepares male lions for a life defined by displacement. The moment they grew old enough to appear as potential threats to the resident males, their presence within the pride shifted from being tolerated to being unwelcome. This early phase established the foundation for what they would eventually become. Their personalities began to diverge, shaped by instinct, competition, and environmental pressures. While not yet the imposing figures that would one day dominate Sabi Sands, they were already developing the resilience required for it. The conditions of their birthplace, an area influenced by territorial conflict and the remnants of previous coalitions, acted as a silent mentor. The Birmingham males were products of a harsh but predictable natural order, one that demanded strength long before they would ever challenge for territory of their own. The transition from adolescence to adulthood marks the most decisive phase in the life of a male lion, and for the young Birmingham males, this stage unfolded with all the challenges typical of dispersal. As they matured, the tolerance once extended to them by the resident males of their natal pride began to erode. This change is universal among lions. When young males reach the point where they could compete for breeding rights, they are pushed out. The Birmingham males were no exception. Dispersal is not a dramatic choice but a biological certainty. The young coalition had to abandon the safety of the pride they had known since birth. They entered a period defined by hunger, long-distance travel, and the constant danger of encountering stronger established males. In this environment, siblings often part ways due to stress, competition, or simple misalignment of paths. While the Birmingham group started larger, natural pressures gradually reduced their number. Over time, only two of them, Nenhan and Efumomo, remained on a shared trajectory that would lead them toward dominance. The early months of their nomadic existence forged their identity. They learned to skirt the edges of territories controlled by older coalitions, avoiding direct contact while still seeking opportunities. They fed on whatever they could find, from scavenged carcasses to small game, developing the strength and coordination that would later define their rule. Every encounter with hyenas, rival males, or protective lionesses served as practical instruction in survival. What separated Nenha and Mfumo from many other dispersing males was the consistency of their partnership. Their cooperation grew stronger during this unstable phase, shaped by the necessity of having a reliable ally. Dispersal exposes young lions to the harsh mathematical reality of survival. Only a small percentage ever succeed in claiming territory. Those who fail often disappear into the anonymity of the wilderness. The Birmingham males, however, demonstrated early signs of the determination required to rise above these odds. As they pushed southward, they left the boundary of their birthplace behind them. What awaited was uncertain, but the direction they followed placed them on a path toward one of the most competitive lion landscapes in Africa. Their journey through hardship, scarcity, and risk was not a heroic ascent, but an inevitable test, stripping away any illusion of safety. It was during this period that the foundations of their future reputation were formed, in a phase defined entirely by endurance and necessity. As Nenha and Mfumo continued their progression southward, the landscape gradually shifted from the mixed habitats of Timbavati into the territories that make up the northern and central sectors of Sabi Sands. This region sits directly adjacent to the unfenced expanse of Kruger National Park, creating one of the most dynamic lion environments in Africa. By the time the pair approached these new boundaries, they had already developed the physical maturity and confidence that marked them as an emerging force. Still, they entered an area known for its high density of competing coalitions, where reputation alone meant nothing. Around 2015, Sabi Sands was in a state of transition. Older coalitions, such as the Matimbes and the last remnants connected to the era of the Mapugos, were weakening. Several prides were in phases of vulnerability or restructuring, creating openings that ambitious males could exploit. This shifting political landscape offered Nenha and Mfumo their first real chance to challenge for territory. Their initial movements through the region were cautious, but observers began to notice signs of their presence. Distant roars, tracks along patrol routes, and brief sightings that indicated a pair testing the responses of resident males. The Birmingham pair did not rely on sudden confrontation. They advanced steadily, observing which prides were stable, which males were aging, and which boundaries were loosely defended. Their focus soon gravitated toward the central and western sectors, where the Yenhoma and Styx prides operated. These prides were essential components of the lion dynamics in the region, and control over them meant access to both resources and breeding opportunities. As weeks turned into months, the pair pressed deeper into the area. Their roars became more frequent, their scent marking more assertive, and their interactions with other lions increasingly bold. Rival males were forced to acknowledge the arrival of a determined coalition that did not match the size of some competitors, but compensated with persistence and unity. Nenha and Mfumo demonstrated the essential qualities of rising territorial males. They showed up consistently, avoided unnecessary risks, and capitalized on moments of weakness within rival coalitions. Their growing presence created tension in nearby prides, as lionesses instinctively recognized the implications of new males entering their range. Territorial shifts among lions are not quick events, but slow-moving processes that unfold through repeated encounters, challenges, and displays. By the time the Birmingham males firmly positioned themselves within the central regions of Sabi Sands, it was increasingly clear that they were not transient wanderers. They were contenders preparing to define the next chapter of the region's lion history. As the Birmingham males solidified their position in central Sabi Sands, their presence inevitably drew the attention of other coalitions operating across the wider region. Sabi Sands and the adjoining Kruger landscape often hold multiple dominant groups at once, each influencing the movements and stability of surrounding prides. For Nenha and Mfumo, this period marked the beginning of a series of rivalries that would shape the trajectory of their rule. These rivalries were not always direct battles but long drawn-out contests of pressure, proximity, and the constant testing of boundaries. One of the earliest and most influential opposing forces came from the Avoca males. At different times, both the northern Avocas and the Nalwaswichaka Avocas occupied territories that bordered or overlapped areas the Birmingham males used. These coalitions consisted of younger or equally ambitious males, and their presence created a prolonged tension along territorial edges. While direct confrontations between coalitions can be fatal, much of the rivalry unfolded through roaring duels, scent marking, and moments when patrol routes crossed at night. Each exchange contributed to defining which areas belonged to whom. Another factor that influenced Birmingham's stability was the presence of the Othawa male line, whose history and lineage carried weight in the western parts of Sabi Sands. Although their interactions with the Birmingham males varied in intensity, the existence of multiple established coalitions in relatively close proximity meant that Nenha and Mfumo had to maintain a near-constant territorial presence. Every absence, even a brief one, risked an incursion that could destabilize the prides under their control. The Birmingham males also contended with the natural pressure created by younger males reaching maturity throughout the region. Coalitions such as the Plains Camp males would emerge later, representing the next generation of challengers. Although these younger coalitions did not immediately threaten Birmingham dominance, the pattern observed in lion populations made their eventual arrival predictable. Younger males are drawn to the scent of instability, and the aging of dominant males acts as a signal for potential takeover. Throughout this period, the Birmingham coalition demonstrated the calculated behavior that often determines long-term success. They patrolled frequently, reinforcing their ownership through physical presence rather than relying solely on their reputation. Their movements were steady, their responses measured. They avoided unnecessary risks, but did not hesitate to assert dominance when required. This strategy allowed them to maintain control over a large territory, despite being only a pair. However, the constant external pressure created subtle but accumulating effects. As time passed, these rivalries chipped away at the energy and stamina needed to defend such an expansive domain. The Birmingham males managed to uphold their rule, but the landscape around them was changing. Competitors were gaining strength, cubs from neighboring prides were reaching maturity, and the natural cycle was beginning to set the stage for eventual confrontation. The rivalries that surrounded the Birmingham males formed a crucial background to their story. These opposing forces shaped their decisions, influenced their range, and foreshadowed the inevitable decline that all dominant male lions eventually face. In this environment of shifting alliances and emerging threats, the Birmingham Empire stood firm, but the signs of future change were already present. Among the Birmingham males, Mafumo, also known as Nala, stood out for his assertive presence and the distinct role he played within the coalition. While both he and Nanha contributed to the stability of their territory, Mafumo often displayed a more forceful temperament. His behavior during patrols, interactions with lionesses, and responses to rival males reflected a personality shaped by confidence and readiness to confront challenges directly. This assertiveness contributed to the pair's early success, helping them establish control over key prides in Sabi Sands. Throughout the years of dominance, Mafumo became known for his strong physical condition and reliability of his movements during territorial patrols. His presence reassured the prides under Birmingham control, particularly the New Huma pride, which depended on stable male protection for the survival of its cubs. Observers frequently noted that his interactions with cubs and lionesses followed the characteristic patterns of experienced territorial males, reinforcing the structural order of the pride. However, the pressures of maintaining a territory in Sabi Sands accumulate subtly. Rival coalitions, harsh seasons, and the natural wear that accompanies constant vigilance gradually affect even the strongest males. As time passed, Mafumo began to show signs of aging and fatigue. These changes did not occur abruptly, but grew noticeable in the small details of his condition and movements. His absences became slightly longer, and his responses to distant roars less immediate. Eventually, Mafumo disappeared from regular observation, a fate not uncommon among aging male lions. In the wild, a male's decline often leads him away from the core of his territory, leaving him vulnerable to injuries, starvation, or encounters with rivals. Although the exact circumstances of his death were never fully documented, his disappearance marked the end of his contribution to the Birmingham legacy. Mafumo's story reflects the reality that dominance in lion society is temporary and physically demanding. His rise, influence, and eventual disappearance followed the natural arc experienced by countless territorial males before him. His absence also created a turning point for the coalition, leaving Nanhana to face the challenges of an evolving landscape alone. After the disappearance of Mafumo, Nanhana remained as the sole representative of the Birmingham coalition. His position, once reinforced by a dependable partner, now depended entirely on his individual strength and endurance. The shift from a two-male coalition to a single defender marked a significant turning point. Sabi Sands is a region where solitary males often struggle to maintain territory, especially when younger coalitions are emerging nearby. Despite these challenges, Nanhana continued to patrol, vocalize, and scent mark, attempting to preserve the boundaries established during the coalition's peak. Observers noticed a change in the rhythm of his movements. While still capable and determined, Nanhana faced the growing demands of protecting prides without reinforcement. The Nkuama pride, which had long relied on the stability provided by the Birmingham males, now experienced increasing vulnerability. Rival males often monitor the condition of neighboring territories, and the absence of one dominant male created an opening that encouraged exploratory movements from other coalitions. Ninhana's persistence during this phase reflected the experience he had accumulated over years of dominance. He displayed strategic caution, avoiding unnecessary confrontations, while still asserting his presence enough to deter immediate takeovers. Yet age and isolation inevitably shaped his trajectory. Encounters with rival males became riskier, and the expanding pressure from younger coalitions signaled a gradual contraction of the territory he could effectively control. As months passed, the pattern of Ninhana's life shifted further. He spent more time on the periphery of former core areas, often roaming between sectors rather than holding a central, undisputed range. This movement mirrored the experiences of many aging male lions, who remained capable but no longer possessed the strength required to defend large prides on their own. Ninhana's later years illustrated the reality of male lion life. Dominance is always temporary, and survival depends on adapting to changing circumstances. His endurance allowed the Birmingham legacy to persist longer than many coalitions under similar conditions, but his path ultimately reflected the natural progression faced by all territorial males. His story became the final chapter of a coalition that had once held one of the most influential positions in Sabi Sands. The final phase of the Birmingham story unfolded gradually, shaped by the predictable forces that govern lion dynamics in Sabi Sands and the greater Kruger system. As Ninhana aged, the region around him continued to evolve. Younger coalitions were rising, prides were reorganizing, and the ecological pressures that had once worked in favor of the Birmingham males were now aligned against them. What had once been a stable and expansive territory began to contract as rivals pressed inward, sensing the decline of a once powerful presence. One of the most noticeable changes involved the increasing activity of younger coalitions, whose movements overlapped with the outer parts of former Birmingham land. These groups, stronger and operating in pairs or trios, represented the next generation of territorial challengers. Their roars carried across the borders that Ninhana once held confidently with Mfumo. Their tracks and scent marks appeared more frequently, indicating that they were probing for opportunities. In lion society, such signs function almost like signals in a shifting political landscape. Younger males advance when they sense that dominant males are aging or operating alone. The prides that had flourished under Birmingham protection also began adjusting to this new reality. Without consistent reinforcement from a strong coalition, the stability of prides like the Nkuamas became vulnerable. Lionesses must evaluate threats constantly, and the absence of reliable territorial males places cubs at high risk during takeover attempts. This transition did not occur abruptly, but through a series of small territorial adjustments and subtle behavioral changes that reflected the pressures building around them. For Ninha, each passing month highlighted the widening gap between experience and physical capacity. His movements became more selective, his patrols shorter, and his presence less constant. Although he retained knowledge of the land and the instincts developed over years of dominance, the physical challenges of repelling younger rivals grew more demanding. The natural cycle that shapes all male lion reigns was asserting itself, not through a single decisive confrontation, but through a combination of age, isolation, and relentless external pressure. Eventually, the Birmingham Empire, once defined by broad patrol routes, strong territorial displays, and influential protection of multiple prides, faded into the background of Sabi Sands. Their territorial boundaries dissolved into the expanding claims of younger males. Their roars, once dominant across the central regions, grew infrequent. The coalition that had shaped a significant chapter of lion history in the region transitioned from an active force into a legacy woven into the lineage of the prides they once controlled. The twilight of the Birmingham rule marked not a failure, but the conclusion of a natural cycle that every lion coalition experiences. Their rise had been measurable, their influence significant, and their decline inevitable. What remained was the imprint they left on the landscape, on the prides they protected, and on the ongoing narrative of Sabi Sands. As the Birmingham legacy moved toward its final stages, the forces shaping lion society in Sabi Sands continued to operate with the same efficiency and inevitability that have governed generations of male coalitions. Dominance among lions is never permanent, and the Birmingham males were approaching the point where age, competition, and shifting territorial structures collectively signaled the end of their tenure. The vast landscape they once controlled was beginning to respond to their diminishing presence. Ninha's reduced patrols allowed younger males to move deeper into areas that had been securely held for years. These younger coalitions often act as indicators of the changing order, drawn by the absence of strong territorial displays and the scent of weakened authority. As they began marking over old Birmingham routes and extending their own boundaries, the territorial identity of the region slowly transformed. In a system where every roar and scent post carries meaning, the gradual replacement of Birmingham markers by new male signatures represented the true beginning of territorial transition. The prides that had formed the core of the Birmingham influence, especially the Kahuma pride, entered a period of adjustment. Lionesses rely on the stability provided by territorial males, not only for protection, but also for reproductive cycles and the security of raising cubs. With Birmingham protection fading, periods of uncertainty increased as lionesses monitored the movements of rival males. During these transitional phases, infanticide becomes a real possibility, because incoming males seek to eliminate cubs sired by previous coalitions in order to bring lionesses back into estrus. These ecological realities shaped the experiences of the prides during the dissolution of the Birmingham era. As new coalitions gained ground, Ninha's role shifted from territorial defender to a more transient presence within the landscape. He no longer anchored the center of a defined range. Instead, he navigated the edges, often avoiding the strongest groups, and occasionally returning to familiar areas without establishing sustained control. This behavior matches the final stage of many aging male lions, who once ruled large territories, but eventually operate on the margins as younger males advance. The decline of a coalition is rarely marked by a dramatic final confrontation. More often, it unfolds through a series of gradual losses: loss of range, loss of influence, and loss of opportunity to shape the next generation. The Birmingham dynasty dissolved through this slow process. Their impact remained visible in the cubs they sired, in the temporary stability they aided, and in the documented history that placed them among the most observed coalitions of their time. By the end of their era, the Birmingham males had become part of the long continuum of lion coalitions, whose reigns rise and fall with the shifting balances of strength, opportunity, and time. Their dynasty ended in accordance with the natural forces that determine every male lion's fate, leaving behind a legacy defined by dominance, perseverance, and eventual surrender to the next generation, waiting to reshape the landscape once again. Although the territorial presence of the Birmingham males eventually faded from Sabi Sands, their influence continued through the prides that carried their genetic legacy. Many of the cubs born under their tenure reached adulthood, contributing to the ongoing dynamics of the region. These descendants integrated into the broader lion population, dispersing into neighboring territories or assuming roles within the prides where they were raised. In this way, the Birmingham lineage became part of the long-term evolutionary fabric of the greater Kruger ecosystem. The prides they once guarded adapted to new coalitions, reflecting the cyclical nature of lion society. Each transition marked a new chapter, shaped partly by the genetic and behavioral stability the Birmingham males had provided during their years of dominance. Their impact persisted not through continued rule, but through the traits passed to the next generation and the structural imprint they left on pride dynamics. In the recorded history of Sabi Sands, the Birmingham Coalition remains recognized as one of the most documented and influential male partnerships of its era. Their rise, dominance, and decline followed the natural progression that defines all lion coalitions, yet their legacy endures in the landscape, the prides they shaped, and the lineage that continues to move through the grasslands.